How do you find out you've been erased from your own family's legacy? My name is Hannah. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I believed my family loved me. Maybe not the loudest kind of love, but the reliable kind. I was wrong. I grew up in Boise, Idaho. My dad, Mark, ran a successful hardware business passed down from my grandfather. I wasn't the kind of daughter who ran wild or rebelled. I studied hard, helped at the shop during summers, and kept my head down while my younger brother Jake got all the attention. I didn't resent it. Not at first. Jake was the charming one, the heir. He could mess up a dozen times and still be greeted with a grin and a boys will be boys. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, quiet, diligent, invisible. Mom passed when I was 15. After that, Dad just hardened. He buried himself in work and leaned on Jake more than ever. I stepped up at home, managing bills, cooking, holding things together. But that never seemed to matter. Still, I didn't push back. I believed that if I kept doing the right thing, it would be seen, valued. When Dad's health started to decline last year, I moved back into our old house. I'd just gotten promoted at work in Boise, but I put that on pause. I bathed him, cooked for him, tracked his meds, made appointments. Jake, meanwhile, was too busy with his real estate hustle in Sun Valley, only showing up when it was time for family photos or holidays. A few months before Dad died, he told me we'd talk about the will soon. I remember sitting with him on the porch as he looked at the sunset, saying, "You've done so much for this family, Hannah. I just want you to know that doesn't go unnoticed." Those words kept me going through the hardest days. Then, after the funeral, Jake called a meeting with the lawyer. I assumed we were just going to go over some logistics, but the lawyer's expression was strange. He looked at me like I didn't belong in the room. The will was read, and I was mentioned once. Dad left me an old watch. Not the house, not the business, not even the savings account I helped him manage. Jake got everything. Everything. I sat there in disbelief, my hands shaking. Jake leaned back in his chair, smug as ever, and said, "Don't take it personally, sis. Dad just knew who was cut out for leadership." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because in that moment I realized something. Jake may have thought he won, but the game wasn't over. What if I told you the will wasn't real? The moment I walked out of that law office, I couldn't breathe. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I just drove past the old hardware store, past the diner my mom used to love, past the high school football field where Jake once scored a touchdown and got treated like a hometown hero. I parked by the river and just sat there, numb. Jake inherited everything, and I got a watch. A broken watch at that. And yet, something didn't feel right. Dad wasn't perfect, but he wasn't cruel. He knew how much I'd sacrificed. He said we'd talk about the will. And now I was supposed to believe he'd left me with nothing? No, something was off. That night, I started going through old paperwork at Dad's house. Tax files, business ledgers, scanned documents, anything. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for until I found a folder marked Private. My heart raced. Inside were letters, notes Dad had written to himself. One said, "Drafted new version with Hannah as 50% partner. We'll meet with Mitchell next Thursday to finalize." Mitchell was Dad's longtime estate lawyer, but the man who read the will wasn't Mitchell. The lawyer at the meeting had been someone new, someone Jake introduced as our updated counsel. That night, I Googled Mitchell. He had passed away, suddenly, 2 weeks before Dad. And then it hit me. Jake had changed the lawyer. Jake had possibly switched the will. I needed proof, and if I was right, I needed help. The next morning, I drove to Mitchell's old firm and asked if they had any documents under my father's name. At first, they hesitated. Then one of the assistants remembered me, said my dad always spoke fondly of his daughter who ran the numbers better than the boys. She handed me a scanned copy of an unsigned will draft. And there it was. Hannah Peterson, 50% ownership of Mark's Hardware and all residential property. Jake Peterson, 50%. Split evenly. Fair. That draft was dated 8 days before Dad died. I took a deep breath. My brother committed fraud, and he was going to pay for it. Have you ever been betrayed by your own family? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your story. And if you're still with me, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more real-life stories, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. I wasn't just grieving my father anymore. I was furious. Jake didn't just edge me out, he rewrote history. And the worst part, he almost got away with it. Almost. The unsigned will draft gave me a starting point, but it wasn't enough. I needed legal help. Someone who understood estate law and wasn't afraid of a fight. That's when I remembered Claire Matthews. Claire and I went to Boise State together. She'd been top of our class, sharp as nails, and last I heard, she opened her own firm specializing in contested wills and elder law. I wasn't sure she'd even remember me, but I reached out anyway. To my surprise, she replied within an hour. You found a draft will dated days before your father died, and your brother switched attorneys last minute. Yeah, I'll take that case. When we met, Claire didn't sugarcoat anything. You're in a tight spot, she said. To prove fraud, we'll need documentation, witnesses, and, if possible, digital records. Emails, appointment confirmations, anything that links your dad to Mitchell and that draft. That night, I dug deeper. I went through Dad's old laptop, which Jake hadn't even bothered to touch. My hands trembled as I sifted through emails. There it was. An email to Mitchell, dated 5 days before Dad passed. Subject: finalizing new will for Hannah's 50% share. Body: looking forward to meeting Thursday. Hannah deserves to be recognized. She's carried more than her share. I felt tears well up in my eyes. Dad did see me. He did want things to be fair. He just ran out of time. I sent the email to Claire, along with everything else I found. 2 days later, Claire filed an official petition to challenge the will in probate court, citing suspicion of undue influence, potential forgery, and last-minute legal manipulation. It triggered a freeze on all asset transfers. Jake couldn't touch a dime until the court reviewed the case. That's when things got ugly. Jake showed up at my apartment in a rage, pounding on the door like a madman. You think you can just take what's mine? He shouted. Dad trusted me. You're just bitter. I didn't open the door. I didn't yell back. I just watched him through the peephole, breathing steadily. Because now, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. What happens when the liar plays the victim, and people believe him? The court date was set. Word spread fast in town. Small towns like ours don't need gossip to travel. It floats on the air. And just like that, I became the daughter who sued her own brother, not the woman fighting for justice, not the caregiver who'd given up months of her life. No, just the problem. Jake worked fast to shape the narrative. He told anyone who'd listen that I was trying to steal from him, that I'd pressured Dad during his final days. It made me sick. But what really shattered me? A week before the hearing, I ran into Aunt Denise, Dad's sister, at the grocery store. She wouldn't even look at me, just said coldly, "You should be ashamed of yourself, Hannah. Mark always trusted Jake with the family name." I stood there, frozen in the cereal aisle, humiliated. I wanted to scream, to show her the emails, the drafts, the truth. But people like Aunt Denise didn't want proof. They wanted peace, and peace, to them, meant letting Jake win. I walked out without buying a thing. Back at home, I broke down in Claire's office. What if no one believes me? I asked. What if I lose everything and become the villain in my own story? Claire leaned forward, her voice steady. Then we show them why they're wrong. We don't win with opinions. We win with facts. and she meant it. That week, Claire subpoenaed Jake's digital communications. She wanted to know who drafted the version of the will we heard at the lawyer's office and when it was created. The results were shocking. The will that gave Jake 100% ownership was created 2 days after Dad died. 2 days. It was backdated. Worse? The metadata showed Jake's laptop had been used to edit the document, not the lawyer's office. That was our smoking gun. When Claire presented this in a pretrial motion, Jake's attorney clearly rattled. Requested an emergency mediation session. It was their way of avoiding a full courtroom showdown. Jake wanted to settle, of course he did. He offered me 10%. As if that was generous. I looked at Claire. She didn't even blink before saying, declined. Because this wasn't about money anymore. It was about the truth. And my father's name. Have you ever had someone lie so well others turned against you? Let's talk about it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this story hits home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to help others going through their own family betrayals. What if the person who saved you was someone you never trusted? I walked into the courthouse wearing my mother's old blazer. She passed away when I was 15, but I swear I could still smell her perfume faintly on the collar. I needed her strength that day. Jake stood across the room, smirking like this was all some business negotiation. His girlfriend clung to his arm like a trophy, and behind him were 3 of my relatives, people I'd grown up with, refusing to meet my eyes. It felt like standing trial in front of a jury that had already decided I was guilty. Claire sat beside me, calm as ever. She whispered, "Stick to the truth. Don't react to him. You're here because he lied, not you." The judge, a woman named Honorable Parker, opened the session. Claire presented the draft will, the email from my father to Mitchell, and the metadata proving Jake's document was forged and backdated. She laid it all out, step by step, with zero theatrics. Just facts. Then Jake's lawyer stood up and said, "Your Honor, this is a case of a grieving daughter misunderstanding her father's true intentions. Our client, Jake Peterson, simply acted in accordance with what Mr. Peterson told him verbally." Claire stood again. "And yet," she said, "he created a document 2 days after the man died and backdated it to look legitimate." The room went silent. That's when the twist came. The judge asked if any other witnesses had worked with Mr. Peterson on estate matters. That's when Claire called someone I hadn't seen in years. Gerald. Gerald used to be my dad's accountant. Quiet, awkward, and always scribbling notes. Jake hated him. I never knew why. Gerald took the stand and unfolded a paper trail, literal receipts, of emails and notes Dad had sent him about revising the business and the estate to include me as co-owner. One email said, "Jake is reckless. I want Hannah to have equal footing. I trust her more than she knows." My throat tightened. Jake's face lost all color. Then Gerald added something I'll never forget. Mr. Peterson made an appointment with his old lawyer Mitchell for the following week. He had every intention of finalizing a new will, but he never made it. Jake said he'd handle things, and suddenly, Mark passed. Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The judge called a recess. Claire turned to me and whispered, "You just got your first major win." I nodded, eyes still fixed on Jake, who sat motionless. For once, he had no smug comeback. No speech, no audience. Only silence. Have you ever felt like winning still made you the villain? After court that day, I didn't go out to celebrate. I didn't even go home. I drove to the edge of town, parked near the lake where Dad used to take us fishing, and just sat in the car, frozen. Everyone always says truth brings peace, but what they don't say is how isolating that truth can be. Yes, I'd won a major point in court. Yes, Jake's fraud was being exposed. But it didn't feel like a victory. Not when people I loved now looked at me like a traitor. Not when family friends unfollowed me and I heard whispers at the grocery store. That's the one who's suing her brother. Like I was breaking some sacred, unwritten family rule. No matter what they do to you, you don't fight back. I wasn't sleeping well. The anxiety gnawed at me. Every time the phone rang, I jumped. Every time I checked the mail, I braced for threats. Jake hadn't contacted me directly since that night he pounded on my door, but he didn't need to. He had his people. Anonymous letters started showing up. One of them just said, "You were always second best. You still are." Claire told me we were close to a turning point, but that only made the pressure worse. "People want a neat story," I told her one night. "They don't want to hear about a daughter fighting her brother in court. They want closure." Claire looked at me carefully. "No, they want truth, even if it's messy. Especially if it's messy." She encouraged me to speak up, publicly, to take control of the story Jake had tried to hijack. So I did something terrifying. I wrote a letter to the local paper. I shared what happened. I didn't mention names, but I told the truth. That I was cut out of my father's legacy despite being his primary caregiver. That I had proof the will was altered. That I was fighting not out of greed, but out of respect for what was right. The letter went viral in our town overnight. And then something unexpected happened. A woman I barely knew stopped me at a coffee shop. "I read your letter," she said. "I'm going through something similar. My brother tried to take our parents home. Thank you for speaking out." I teared up. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen. Have you ever had to choose between staying silent or standing up for yourself? Share your story in the comments. I'm listening. If this part of my journey moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. What if the truth came from the person you thought had turned their back on you? I never expected a knock at my door to change everything. It was late, almost 9 p.m. I'd just made tea and was halfway through drafting another response to the court. When I opened the door, I froze. Aunt Denise. The same woman who called me shameful in the cereal aisle, the one who'd always stood firmly behind Jake. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. "I read your letter," she said quietly, "and I think it's time I told you something." I let her in, still stunned. She sat at my kitchen table like she had a weight tied to her chest, and then, slowly, she began to talk. She told me about a conversation she had with my dad 2 weeks before he died. He said he was worried Jake had become manipulative, that Jake had asked him to sign a power of attorney document, something about simplifying paperwork. "Your father didn't feel right about it," he told me. "I need to make sure Hannah is protected." I couldn't breathe. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I didn't want to believe he was serious, but I saved this, just in case. Inside was a handwritten note from my father, dated and signed, to Denise. "If anything happens before I update the will, please tell Hannah I intended for her to co-own the business and the house. Jake has been pushing for full control. I do not want that." My hands shook as I read it. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Because I didn't want to believe my nephew could do this, but after your letter, I realized I believed the wrong person." For the first time in this whole ordeal, I cried in front of someone from my family. The next day, Aunt Denise met with Claire and signed an affidavit. Her testimony, combined with the letter, added a new layer to our case. Intent. Proof that Dad never meant to cut me out. That Jake had manipulated the situation while Dad was vulnerable. And suddenly, the momentum shifted. Even people who had stayed silent before began to reach out. Messages, emails, quiet nods in the streets. I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the daughter fighting for her place in the story. What does justice look like when the damage is already done? The final court date arrived on a cold gray morning in Boise. I stood in front of the mirror wearing the same blazer I wore the first day, my mother's, this time. buttoned tight over a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't walking into that courtroom as the forgotten daughter anymore. I was walking in as a woman who had fought, with evidence, with truth, and with everything she had left. Jake barely looked at me when we entered. He knew. His lawyer knew. Claire and I had built a case that didn't just poke holes in his version of events, it shredded them. Judge Parker took her time, reading her ruling out loud for the court. She acknowledged the forged documents, the questionable timing, the statement from my father's accountant, and then she turned to the envelope. The handwritten letter from Dad to Aunt Denise. That, she said, tells me everything I need to know about Mr. Peterson's intent before his passing. She ruled that the forged will was invalid. She reinstated the prior version of the estate and ordered the hardware store, the house, and all remaining assets to be split 50/50 between Jake and me, as my father had originally planned. Jake stood up, furious. "This is a joke. She's lying. This is a witch hunt." The judge didn't even flinch. "You committed fraud, Mr. Peterson," she said, "and you're lucky your sister isn't pressing criminal charges." Claire leaned over and whispered, "Now that's justice." But strangely, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt relief. I felt like I could finally breathe. Outside the courthouse, Jake tried to confront me one last time. "You think you won?" he snapped. "Dad still liked me better." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I just felt done. "You can keep the approval," I said quietly. "I'll take the truth." I walked away and never looked back. It's been 6 months now. I've moved into the family home, not because I needed the property, but because it finally felt like mine. I've reopened the hardware store, renamed it Peterson and Daughter, and hired 3 women from the community who'd been overlooked for years, just like I was. As for Jake, he disappeared into the background. Word gets around. His reputation's tainted, his ego bruised. He still has his half, but nothing to do with it. And me? I built something from the wreckage, because they thought they won. But I had one more move. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated or forced to fight for what was rightfully yours? Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories of strength, justice, and redemption. You're not alone.